That joke isn't funny anymore. Available on Amazon and everywhere. Hey guys, welcome back to the Lou Perez podcast. I'm your host, Lou Perez, and I am joined today by author, academic, entrepreneur, and one of my favorite follows on Twitter or the X, Mr. Wilfred Reilly. Will, thanks for joining me.
Yeah, glad to be here.
Yeah, and for those of you who you may have heard me and Will in discussion on the Cut the Bull podcast with our friend Charles Love, which I highly recommend, and I'm very fortunate that I get to be a guest every now and then on the podcast. So definitely check it out. So Will, I first came across you on X, and then I read your book about hate crime hoaxes. And actually, I didn't actually read the book. It was the very first audio book that I've ever listened to. So I don't know how you feel about that. If you're like, you should have read my words rather than have a voice actor read them to me.
No, I don't have any. I mean, I don't want to make some glib random comment like we get paid the same, but no, it doesn't really matter whatsoever. There actually are some authors that have almost a weird attachment to people buying paper copies of their book. That'll only sign original hardbacks at events and so on. I've learned since I've been in the writing trade, but I'm not really one of those guys. The one thing that I did find out about my audiobook is that Regnery has a good relationship with a lot of the better known audiobook readers, because a lot of them are conservative Brits for whatever reason. Like, Americans think a British accent adds 10 IQ points to anything. Mm-hmm. So when a lot of people apparently like the guy who read my audiobook and bought the book for that reason. So we keep selling all these audiobooks, and people have asked me if I'm going to read my own book for any of my books. And apparently we got the same audiobook reader for HarperCollins. So no, like he's doing a great job. So shout to the audiobook team. But no, I don't care one way or another.
Yeah, he was. It was funny because I'd never heard your voice before. So at first I was like, oh, is this what Will sounds like? Because the guy has like perfect, elocution. It's been a while since I've heard it, but I remember sometimes speaking along, trying to get his accent, but it's something I have no hope of ever actually accomplishing. With the book, with hoaxes, I mean, this came out, a few years ago, and I guess since then we've seen, some more hoaxes, hate crime hoaxes. Are there any recent ones that have been just like a favorite, of yours that you could talk about?
Well, I haven't honestly paid as much attention to the hate crime hoax sector in recent years. I do keep my spreadsheet updated, so people will send them to me. But I get the impression that most high-profile hate incidents are hoaxes. This clearly is not true of the average person who gets beaten up outside a nightclub or something like that. But I mean, there was recently a video that went viral and almost led to criminal charges, where a pizza delivery driver claimed that somebody called him basically a nigger, like he delivered a pizza pie to someone's door, and the customer just at the end of the interaction was like, and that's why you're a nigger, or something like that. Just a brutal line. And it turned out, I mean, I've listened to the audio tape which someone sent me, and the guy asked for a signature. There's a court case proceeding forward, but I mean, I'm pretty sure that's gonna go into the hoax file fairly soon. I mean, we've seen a couple of just high profile cases collapsed recently. I mean, apparently on the right wing side, one of the people who was claiming that there were some pretty significant anti-Jewish hate crimes during the kind of pro-Israel, pro-Palestine series of clashes, invented at least some of those himself, and that's a case that's currently ongoing, that's currently being investigated. But I'm not really sitting out there anymore, like picking out everyone from the slipstream. Like when a case comes along or someone shoots it to me, I'll put it in the file. I should probably take about 2 months at some point in the near future and just really break down like a bunch of the currently ongoing cases. I know there have been at least 60 for the past year or so that would fit the definition of, there's a nationally reported story. It's just universally attributed to hate. That turns out to have been invented by the quote unquote victim, or just never to have happened at all. So, I mean, the phenomenon seems to still be going on apace.
Yeah, in my book, I referenced your book and at least one of the cases that you highlighted. There was one case at a college where a Black student said that there was a swastika written on the wall of a bathroom in human shit, which just didn't make sense on just so many levels. I mean, the first thing is, if you're a Nazi, you hold this symbol pretty, a pretty sacred symbol. So the idea that you're going to draw it out of your own human shit is pretty ridiculous. But then also in the end, there was basically no evidence that it even existed, or if it was anything beyond like a smear on the bathroom wall.
Yeah, that was an interesting case right there. So that was part of the University of Missouri situation, which occurred a couple of years back, and which was really interesting because I don't know if people still remember this, but this was a major national story. This idea that the University of Missouri was beset by this series of just brutal, abusive incidents that were targeting minority students, especially Black students. Like the football team at one point refused to play their games. I don't know if they ever actually canceled a game because of this. But I mean, so like the original idea was that all this stuff was going on campus. Like allegedly a student was attacked by racists. Then another student had a pickup truck drive by him with people like leaning out of it, screaming these awful racial slurs. Students who attempted to protest were run down by the college president's motorcade. I mean, the way this was presented originally was people were kind of scrambling out of the way, at risk of their lives. The KKK was spotted on campus. And then finally, there was the shit swastika. This is like the ultimate atrocity. Someone wrote a swastika in human crap on the wall of a dorm that was occupied by a lot of Black students and Black athletes. And I mean, like Clay Travis and a couple of other people have looked at this even before I did. And it turns out basically all this is bullshit. Like there may have been a fight between a white guy and a Black guy, with the white guy being kind of racist, but like the Ku Klux Klan was never on campus. That was something that appears to have just been invented by the student body president. So literally a student activist just made it up. I mean, like a kid went on Twitter, not even arguably X at the time, and posted like, Ku Klux Klan spot on campus. I am in coordination with the FBI, the Federals, and the state trooper. Like it's this laughably like college illiterate tweet. And later on, that like some National Guard general was like, if we do encounter the Klan in a major urban setting, we don't liaise with like the student government vice president. Like,
yeah, like yeah, you just froze on your end. You're frozen.
I look completely retarded in this picture. Look at this shit.
It's not the best picture. I'll tell you what, Will. If you could have froze on any other.
I just like we're probably recording sound now. I mean, so just like, but so the whole student government thing that turned out to be a complete lie. The like motorcade thing, I actually saw a video of that at one point. Like the campus president is attempting to kind of go through the center of the campus community, the college president is, and there are a bunch of kids standing in the way, and one of them is lightly bumped by a car. The kid like moves aside, and like if you've ever watched LeBron James play basketball, it's like that kind of thing. Like he just falls down. I just did the flop. He probably couldn't. Yeah, but like I mean that incident never really occurred to any significant degree. And then finally the swastika thing, I mean, there wasn't a whole lot of evidence about what that meant really or theoretically. I mean, Ben Shapiro, the conservative commentator, has pointed out there's no particular evidence, even if that was real, that would have been intended to target African Americans as opposed to Jewish people. But I mean, more seriously, like you said, I mean, the swastika is a nearly holy symbol for these Nazi types. Like, there's no evidence that being written in feces was intended to celebrate Nazism, anything like that. And the other thing, of course, is that it probably was a hoax. Like the entire thing was probably put together by student activists. Like every couple of days, these incidents kept occurring and kept being debunked. But the end result was that the larger society, which didn't know this, got very involved. And the general narrative was that these students were being really roughly handled. They were being really abused. So it was a weird situation.
In my book, in the chapter, basically what I say is that if you're going to commit a hate crime hoax, you need better writers. And it would actually help if the hoaxers would actually seek out racist people who could write the stuff and just make it believable. Because even just like the idea that with all the progress that we've made in the United States, that the most racist place that you could be is like a liberal arts college. It just doesn't make much sense.
Well, I actually think that, I mean, as a professional comic, the line there is hilarious. But I mean, like, both parts of that are actually worth unpacking. Like, so for part one, this seems like a bunch of people are writing for a mediocre TV show.
Yeah.
That's kind of what's happening with a lot of these incidents. Like, the archetypal hate crime hoaxer is kind of a collegiate liberal arts student or theater major. So that's one of the things we noticed throughout the book, that one of the big signs of a probable hoax is that there's an incredibly dramatic, unusual incident that happens, if that makes sense. So like when I said, I actually don't want to cast doubt on the average criminal allegation, like the average person that says, I was sexually assaulted, or, I was beaten up by a group of other males outside a nightclub, or, a country bar at closing time, and I'm a black guy. Like, I would say that incident happened 95 times out of 100 in either of those cases. What the cases that turned out to be frauds were the cases like Jussie Smollett. I mean, that's the archetypal example, or Covington Catholic, where there's a claim that this very big dramatic incident took place kind of in the public square. Like, there's a Native American Indian chief who's just walking along. He's trying to beat his sacred rain drum in peace. He comes across a group of Caucasian kids, and they accost him and start shoving him back and forth and, chanting "Build the Wall," which is a very ironic thing to say to an Indian, And so that's what's going on. Like, that sort of stuff always turned out to be fake. Like, when I looked at those cases in depth, they were almost never real. I mean, you're thinking of like the young woman in Wisconsin who said that a car full of frat guys in Hawaiian shirts pulled up next to her and doused her with like lighter fluid, and then somehow threw an activated lighter into her car, which is a thing you can't do. When you think about just lighting a cigarette, like, you can't hold down your lighter to get a fire going and then throw that joint 20 feet away and, while it continues to burn, immolate somebody. But I mean, that was a typical case that led to marches, that led to protests, a scuffle between Greeks and radical students. And then, I mean, obviously turned out not to be true. So there is that theater kid element to a lot of these. And you can go through a bunch of them. Like, there was a kid at the University of Chicago who claimed that an entire group of hackers was threatening to sexually abuse him, like commit these violent gay rapes that he described in some detail, let's say. I mean, and, that itself is kind of an interesting thing. Like, what prompted that level of interest? Will we ever know? Who's to say? But the second thing, though, when you said, like, if these people are going to be that theatrical theater kid sort of person when it comes to this, they should talk to some real racists. There was something else that kept coming up with these hate hoax incidents. Like, stuff was done wrong. And I don't mean wrong in the sense of like it's wrong to be a racial bigot. I mean, like, the swastika was backwards.
Right.
Or like upside down, or it'd have like 6 arms instead of 4. So when you see these kind of incidents where something just incredibly dramatic seems to happen in a really unlikely setting, like the women's dorm at Bowdoin, and it's done kind of wrong, like there's a noose, but it's mistied because some Bowdoin sorority girl obviously did it, that's where you're in really likely hate crime hoax territory.
Yeah, and I'm imagining the way the way I time my shoelaces is I take the 2, I guess I make like 2 rabbit ears and then do it. I don't do the traditional knot. So like I would if I was making a noose, someone would be like, this guy doesn't know what he's doing. He's got the 2 rabbit ears going. With that, I wonder. We hear a lot about cancel culture, and the perpetrators of hoaxes. I mean, have any been canceled? I mean, I guess that some of them are on such a small level, or they're kids, and it's not like I'm hoping that their lives are ruined after this. But I think aside from Jussie Smollett and the Covington Catholic incident, I'm not that familiar with anybody who's actually like faced any repercussions. I mean, with Smollett, I mean he's dug in his heels and continues to claim that this attack happened. how, it just so happened to be perpetrated by, two Nigerian American brothers who he knew and hired to do it. But yeah, I mean, like, is there a punishment, for, this sort of thing?
Usually, I mean so there are a bunch of patterns that went into the hoax hate incidents. I mean, one of them, just bluntly, was that most of them happened in these collegiate kind of liberal environments. So a crazy number of the hoax hate incidents, I mean, it was about 2/3, took place in the way I framed this in the kind of methods portion of the book, is a college, a university, or a senior high school environment, like a prep school. And that's actually really bizarre, because that's where perhaps 1% of the US population is concentrated. And there are obvious reasons for that. Like, this is where you get the hormonal, theatrical, like, you don't have theater kids on a trading floor at age 40. It's an age bound syndrome. So, I mean, that's where you got a lot of the incidents. One of the characteristics was that they were extremely dramatic. One of the characteristics was that they tended to use, and I just said this now, but I think an even better way of saying it would be, they tended to use tropes from like the old wars, when all the races were killing each other, when whites were kind of getting the better of it. So it's like these ancient evils, like a clan robe would be a common thing that would be seen. And the thing that's notable about that is that we have racists today in modern America, but that symbology is almost never used. So, I mean, like, if someone were to draw Pepe the Frog or Groiper or something like that on the wall of a university building, like on the Commons, I would assume that actually would be a prank done by the far right, if that makes sense. But like, if someone's walking through campus in a Klan robe, I would assume that that's either a hoax or some fraternity guy lost a bet, something like that, because there just aren't many people in the Klan. I mean, the Klan's an archaic institution that currently has less than 5,000 members around the country. I mean, it's on the equivalent of endangered status if you look at SPLC and so on, even commentaries about it. So, I mean, all of that is part of the, I guess, the ecosystem in which this happens. But in terms of your specific question there, like, what happens to these people? I mean, usually nothing.
Mm-hmm.
There's something a lot of people don't know, and that you very definitely should know if you have a kid, especially a boy going into college, is that there's a separate university system of justice. And this actually gets into, well, thing that Republican and Democratic presidents trade off on is what their Title IX policy is going to be.
Right.
And what that means is what the policy is going to be for people that are accused of offenses involving sexuality at all, like rape, which generally means sex while you're drunk, or domestic violence on a collegiate campus. Can male students, for example, be charged in what are basically kangaroo courts, where you don't have the right to confront your accuser or any of the other rights that exist in mainstream society? And generally, guys like GOP guys like Trump will try to pull that back a little bit, and Democratic presidents like Biden will try to enhance the rights, the right of colleges to operate those systems. But anyway, blah blah blah. Like, most of the hate crime hoaxers in colleges and this sort of thing are just they're penalized in those systems. You get suspended for a semester or something like that. Even outside, if you're some small town police force charges you, I mean, you get filing a false police report. It's the lowest grade of felony. So, I mean, most of them, a lot of these cases are also dropped. Like, we just went through the whole racial reckoning period where people were kind of hysterical about the idea of confronting and disagreeing with minorities. So, in many of these cases, the city didn't really want to make a big deal and say, well, okay, this black radical is an IQ 95 moron, and this case never happened, and we're going to publicly charge him with the felony crime. I mean, just, you would see something like, well, we've decided to stop pursuing these charges, and then not to file any additional charges against the person who brought them forward, or something like that. So that's a lengthy way of saying very often nothing happens. I mean, some college disciplinary procedure maybe, or misdemeanor charge in the local court.
I guess when you're weighing, risk to reward, it makes sense. Like, it's my junior year. I haven't done I haven't faked anything yet. Might as well get it out of the way. I could still graduate and all that. When you bring up, sort of the these symbols from history, these, racist tropes of the noose and the grand wizard garb, or, whatever that is. How much of it is due to, I don't know if it's like revisionist history, where it's sort of the, history is, nothing ever changed. It's just gone underground, and it pops up. Specifically, like, I guess, American racism and that sort of thing. Like how much of it is comes down to sort of rewriting history, or just pretend, or not even knowing it. I don't know.
Well, you mean in terms of why people keep using these tropes, and they think they're believable?
Yeah.
Yeah, I actually think that's a really insightful question. Like, do people think that this stuff is believable because they've been taught a bunch of dreck about it, how this is how America really is on the campus? Maybe. Yeah, I mean, I think that to an external observer, it's just not plausible that the Ku Klux Klan is going to be at Oberlin College. I think if you spent a bunch of time hearing about how racist every sector of society is, and how there's no way to get away from that racism, and how it's accompanied by sexism so brutal that 1 in 4 of your classmates will be sexually abused that year, defined as some feminist group did in 1963, and so on and so on and so on. Like, it might seem more likely that this is the case. That actually is probably part of the zeitgeist where this happens in general. Like, you keep hearing that all this awful stuff is supposed to be happening. But in reality, I mean, everyone has a pretty happy life with their upper middle class boyfriend, and all the different races get along fine. So if you want to make a symbolic point about racism, you might have to invent some. I mean, I think that's very real at the typical Big Ten or Ivy League college. There just isn't a huge amount of on the ground racial bigotry. And yeah, I mean, those symbols might come into play there because of what people have learned that America really is, or something like that. And there's a funny distinction, actually, right, between reality and fantasy, because in reality, there is very little hate in most of the environments where most of these incidents occur. I wouldn't be surprised if at a typical college, the only hate crime reported in the past 10 years was a hoax. Or there were like 3 reported if you count male violence against women, but the 1 was a hoax or something like that. It's a substantial percentage in a lot of these places.
It seems like, in a way, certain people are bummed that those hoaxes are hoaxes. Like,
Oh, yeah.
when I look at, like, the Jussie Smollett case, it's like, we should all be very happy that did not happen. Like, it's really great that a gay black man was not, effectively lynched on the streets of America. That's fantastic. It's like, ironically, it's like, it's amazing, and something to be applauded that he would have to fake that. It's like, we've come so far that we need to invent this shit.
Yeah, I mean, I think that, so first of all, that's objectively obviously true for good race relations in general. So I mean, I wondered for a long time why pointing out that race relations are good seems to be met with such intense hostility. I mean, like Roland Fryer, Harvard University prof, great guy, a couple of years ago found that there are very few differences in police interactions with people of different races. Like, black guys are like 11% more likely to be manhandled. I don't think he adjusted for like verbal interactions between them and the cops. White guys are like 30% more likely to get shot. And both of those are like kind of big differences, but you're not seeing the 300% unadjusted gaps that people often claim in either direction. You're not, certainly for black people, you're not. You were just seeing normal professional policing. And I read through that paper, and his methods are really good. And I was like, oh, okay, that's cool. Cops could tone it down a little bit at the 2 extremes with the black or a poor white suspect, but okay. But that paper was greeted with complete hysterics, with people saying that it had to be wrong. And, Fryer was almost fired from Harvard. They dug up some sexual harassment scandal a couple of years ago and all this stuff. I mean, and, I think that the reason for the backlash is pretty simple. Like, my boy, James Lindsay, will say, nothing for these communists, for the actual, not like, I don't think all leftists are communists or anything, but for actual revolutionary types, nothing is ever about the individual cause. It's always about revolutionary change. So I think that a lot of activists do need to believe. I don't think they like to believe. I actually think a lot of upper middle class whites are actually pretty close to being like diagnosable mental health neurotics, because this stuff has such an impact on your brain, believing all this bullshit all the time, all this climate stuff and all this race war stuff. I mean, there's people that won't have kids because they think the world's going to end and all this. But I mean, I think that they need to believe that there are these major problems in society, because most of their solutions are based on the idea that there are these major problems in society. Like, if you ever look at one of the plans for reparations, the first 7 or 8 pages are written in legal brief style, and it's sort of like, because systemic racism is responsible for the police genocide of black men, because black and Hispanic men under-earn whites by X amount, because of the level hate crimes are often mentioned, in fact. And if you just break this down and you look at it and say, well, in fact, there are only 7,000 hate crimes a year, and whatever 20% of those are probably hoaxes when you get up near the high profile end. That completely invalidates the argument, and that has real life consequences for actual policies people want. So I think that's why people are so resistant to saying, okay, that this just is bullshit. There is no major ethnic conflict. There's pretty obviously not. I mean, what there is mostly invented now. I mean, it's race relations have gotten worse over the past 10 years, but that's because we made them worse, kind of. I mean, the media constantly reports on, things, the quote unquote, the other man is doing, constant crime news, constant critique of white people. In terms of an actual metric like interracial marriage, that's increased every year since like 1960. So there's no real, we'd say, baseline reason for all this hostility. But I think it's necessary for certain people to achieve their goals. I don't think that's true entirely just on the left either.
Yeah, I've become very addicted to X, and now it sounds like a drug. Like, I'm on so much X. Yeah, exactly. I've been, if when it was Twitter before Elon took over, I was on it a good amount, but now I'm on it so much, and the For You tab really knows me. And all it feeds me is just a lot of contentious race stuff, where now I'm like, holy shit, there are actual racists out there. There are like there are the anonymous ones who will say racist stuff, but there are people with real, like, their picture is in their profile, and they have their bio where you can reach them, who are legit racist. I mean, there was something a few weeks back. Oh yeah, I think it was around the time of Adolf Hitler's birthday, for 420, and the amount of people talking about how you've been lied to all these years about this man. Like, listen to what he really said, or people coming out and saying, I don't trust this translation. Who here speaks German? Because there's no way that he's saying what they're telling you. So I'm gonna, I wonder how you contend with that. Because the way that I contend with it is like, I didn't know that they were out there, but I also recognize how small of a group it is, because it is this online platform where I'm seeing them. I'm not seeing them in the streets. I'm not having these normal conversations. People don't feel as confident to, at least like with me, to let me know what they really think about, the JQ and all that. And in a way, I'm thankful for that. But it is interesting to actually watch this, play out on online and in comment sections.
I mean, I think it's interesting. So, I mean, first of all, the idea that race relations are improving, or were improving until the modern, quote unquote, Great Awakening in about 2012 isn't really all that disputed. I mean, so the one thing people often look at is interracial marriage as a metric. Like, are you comfortable with yourself or a close friend, a family member marrying someone of a different race? In 1950, for both blacks and whites, that was about 4%. And all those people lived in like New York or Chicago, literally. Maybe like 5 in Detroit. But today it's 94%. It's 96% for whites and 93% for blacks. I think that could be in the other direction, the way that cuts. But I mean, so like, objectively, we're getting a lot less racist. I think there are a couple of different things there. One, that's starting to trend back recently, because people are tired of all the constant racial complaining, probably especially from black people, but really from everybody. So like, if you look at race relations, they've always been rated as good, like 70% good since like 2000. Like, we're not fighting each other anymore. OJ is over, 90s, like 65 to 70%. And right now they've just steadily dropped to like 33% is the black rating. I think 35% is the white rating. And that's very recent. And the obvious reason for that, putting aside all the bullshit, is Black Lives Matter and all this other stuff. Like, we've seen pictures of like the different ethnic groups fighting in the street for 10 years now. Black people robbing stores, cops shooting people. So, I mean, it's almost, if you wanted to take a multi-ethnic society and make people as angry and pissed off as possible, you would pretty much do what we've been doing. I mean, and it's definitely had some effects. And yeah, I mean, I think that when you get into the anonymous platforms, it's still probably under 10 or 15% of people, looking at the first figure I gave. But yeah, you see that there are more people that are real racists. It looks like my cat is rubbing my shooter. It's moving now. It's kind of wild. It's like a monster movie thing. But you see that it is. I mean, like, when you said, I'm surprised to see they're real racists, because if you live in a city and like you're a reasonably good dude, you don't meet people that are open racists in really any direction. There's no one that's like, you know what, I hate Mexicans. Like, it's just something that would be totally like abnormal.
Or that's what Puerto Ricans say. Yeah, Puerto Ricans hate Mexicans. That's how it is.
Yeah, I mean, you might hear somebody say that like a gym or like a Puerto Rican dance party is a joke. But I mean, like, but I mean, on Twitter, yeah, you log in and you see like Nick Fuentes and Lucas Gage and guys like this that have like white nationalists in their bios. You see like Dr. Umar, Black Hotep. People are just like, I'm a racist. And they're being followed by hundreds of thousands of people. There's a page called Black People Taking L's, Blacks Taking L's, that has 200,000 followers. And so, I mean, in social media, you realize like, wow, there is a real market for this. There are other people, I don't know if they're necessarily racist, but there's a guy called I.O. that talk just constantly about racial differences. Like, according to the latest IQ data, Black Americans are a bit ahead of Egyptians, but still 11 points behind white Americans. And you have all these people that follow them. And, you know, many of those followers are openly racist. And many of these people are talking in the comments about eugenic stock breeding of humans and so on. So I think that without the online media, many people probably would not know that existed. I do think that sector is growing over the past couple of years. Again, the question is kind of what that means. No one expresses it in public. And again, one thing to remember is people on X or even Facebook come from all around the world. So like when I've gotten in serious debates with some of these people, I mean, like I remember talking to Amy Therese online, who's pretty cool, but he's on the hard right. And just realizing, hey, this person is Lebanese and from Australia. And like none of the other people that were in like the comment war with us were American. Like 2 were Russian, you know, 1 was from Greece. And so it's like, you know, how many of these people that are talking about US black-white relations are even from the USA or even real people, as opposed to like some college girl running a porn bot account? You know, so that's the thing with social media. Like Ian Miles Cheong is another one of these guys. If we're talking about big Twitter X personalities, he's probably the leading poster of like conflict, race, class stuff from the USA. He's a guy from Malaysia. I mean, I think everyone knows that now, but that didn't really come out until like a couple months into Elon Twitter. He lives in Kuala Lumpur in a high rise in a different country. I mean, so just that you do have to take that into account, that not only is this rare in day-to-day life, but many of the people that are most engaged aren't even Americans. They're not blacks or whites in our terms. They're just people from all around the world taking an interest in hot stories. So kind of a mix there.
Yeah. I wonder if has something to do with like that outsider's perspective, that they feel like they, can comment on it, on this stuff. I mean, one of the things that it happened a while ago, there was, I can't even believe that this was a controversy. What a stupid controversy it was. It was like a really cute girl from, I think, like Alabama with a thick accent who is a builder, a carpenter. She likes fishing and all that. Seems like, a great gal, and really someone who's really enjoying her life. And some chick who I think is Lebanese came out and basically said, Western women are awful. That accent's terrible. Who the hell would want to, be with this woman? And a lot of people came out, I guess, on both sides to defend either chick. And I remember just seeing the Lebanese woman, and from the pictures that I've seen of her, there are like, there's like a sub, I don't know, not a sub, I don't want to say subspecies of women. There's a type of woman who has like so much work done to her face and wears so much makeup that she could be 23 or she could be 53. You have no fucking idea what they are. They just look kind of like, okay, this is like a living doll sort of thing. And it's a look that I'm not into. I'm just not into. So it was funny seeing somebody who looks like that talk down on a very cute girl, but then also me being kind of a nationalist. I'm like, who the fuck's this Lebanese bitch talking about an American chick? Get the fuck out of here, But
Go back to your country.
Whatever shithole that is. I call every other country a shithole, even though they might be beautiful.
As you should.
But it was fun. I mean, it was fun seeing that exchange. It was like, now that we have way more than like 4 TV channels, we're not all watching the same show, but when something like this pops off, it's like, oh, we're all watching, the same, trash incident happen, in real time and taking part of that.
I mean, so again, I think one thing that's kind of interesting, I don't necessarily have a huge problem with the fact that there are a lot of racists online and they argue with all the other camps online, like the intellectual dark web, like erotic geniuses and the crazy social justice warriors and the boomer conservatives that have like 18 guns in their shed and all these different people that are part of political discourse, like the non-racist dissident right that would bring back like eugenics and public hanging. Like all that stuff. It just kind of is what it is. Like, I'm not a very moral person in the conventional sense. Like, I don't think that, obviously, you murder, rape, you can't advocate for that stuff online. But I don't think there are that many things that you should really be censored for saying. And certainly saying, like, I don't like Mexicans is not one of them. I mean, I personally think you should like Mexicans, but that's really just irrelevant. So, like, having these kind of open conversations is fun. And I remember exactly what you're talking about. It was Sameera Khan, the like Lebanese, British, Indian journalist or whatever, was talking about like, there's a well-known Alabama internet personality who's into like real fishing and does Instagram with her boyfriend and so on down the line. She just looks like a fun chick. But she's like drinking beers on her porch and like her and him are building like their first house together and all this. Right. And someone posted one of her videos and it's like, this is wifey material. And like all these French and Arab women started chiming in and we're like, I don't know about that. What are you talking about? And Sameera Khan was the one that was like, no, this is ridiculous. These Western women are basically dudes. This is like someone you'd hang out with and maybe have an affair with. Like, I am a real woman. And then men started chipping in like, no, I don't want this pampered bitch. Like, I don't want to have to buy $1,000 worth of perfume a month. Shut up, Jasmine. And I mean, so like Phil just started making fun of each other. I don't endorse the insults in this exchange, but I mean, just like that sort of stuff. I mean, as long as everyone's comfortable, like whatever, it's funny. Like I would pick the Alabama girl, but yeah, you do see a lot of that on X. But I mean, it's also within, I guess, when we're talking about hate hoaxes and all that, it's also within that frenzied everyone watching environment where like likes and attention, clout become kind of a drug. That people, I mean, that's really the context in which people do a lot of crazy stuff. The idea of people like losing control of and leaking their sex tape or, pretending to get beaten up by 4 people of a different race, something that would have seemed incredibly nonsensical, incredibly crazy to like everyone's grandparents. It makes sense now because you're in this kind of stimulus reward environment. Where if you do that, 900,000 people will review your sexual performance and send you money and do all this other stuff. So, I mean, is that good for humans? Probably not. If you look at any of the studies about what happens when you put like cocaine in water bottles for gerbils, like how much stimulation can like one predatory mammal seek? And it turns out it's like all of it. You can keep pressing the button until you die when it comes to drugs or any other positive stimulus.
Yeah. That made me think of just a completely random thing. There's this, there are these people who have this terrible affliction where they orgasm uncontrollably, and I don't mean like a guy's like a minute man, who ejaculates when he's having sex. Like throughout the day, uncontrollably, will just break down and just start, coming in his pants. It sounds like fun for a day. But as far as, if you're trying to get somewhere, it seems like it would be a really big problem. But that's something I discovered online. So thank you so much, the gods of Silicon Valley, for sending that my way. One of the one of the things that I've been interested in, thanks to the For You tab on X, has to do with, I guess, Egypt and the real Egyptians, quote unquote, real Egyptians, where there are a couple of accounts that I follow. I think one of them's Typical African, I think might be the one guy, where he's constantly talking about how the Egyptians were black, or basically the way the black people from Western Africa, where slaves that were came to the United States predominantly came from. Those are the people who were not only built the pyramids, but they were also in charge of Egypt at the time. And I've always wanted to get your take on this, like as someone who studies history and talks about it. Like what's going on there? Does he have something? Is there something to it, or
Yeah, the whole so first of all, I mean, like, a lot of people misunderstand Africa. So Black Americans are Ubuntu, which is a specific Black ethnic group from originally what we think of now as Nigeria, maybe Cameroon. Some people say, like, there's some dispute about that in the literature, actually. But the Bantu, like, contrary to white racists, actually weren't like a Stone Age, whatever. Like, the Bantu were iron-using warrior people that used to fight with the Egyptians along their southern marches, like on their southern border that sparred with the Nubians. But like, black black doesn't mean Bantu. African doesn't mean Bantu. Africa is full of a bunch of different kinds of people. There's actually more genetic diversity within Africa than there is within the rest of the human race combined. Now, there's not really more genetic diversity within Bantus than there is within any other large ethnic group, which will become important. But I mean, like, the reason Africa looks the way it does today is that the Bantu ethnic group around maybe 500 AD started what we call the Bantu migration. Like, the Bantu, I guess, kingdoms by this point in West Africa, like Nigeria, Ghana, all that, Benin, places that we've heard of even today, were getting really densely populated, and people just started walking south. And the Bantu migration ended up conquering or killing pretty much everyone that lived in Africa at that time, like Khoisan, like what we think of as Bushmen now, because they were driven into kind of the high desert. Pygmies, like the famous, the smaller people of the forest. The what used to be called the quote unquote coastal Caucasians, like there were enclaves of traders along the African coast and so on. Most of those people got killed by Shaka and his boys. Like, all those people migrated from the original Bantu source region down to the south of Africa. So, I mean, like, actually, in terms of South Africa, for example, when people say, or the former Rhodesia, Zimbabwe, when people say, like, well, the whites came there as colonizers and conquerors and took the land, well, kind of, yeah, but like, so did the black people. Like, the black conquerors conquering from the north got to South Africa at the same time the white conquerors who were conquering up from the south did. So the Bantuization of Africa is actually a really recent thing. Prior to the relatively modern era, you would have had the black Bantu kingdoms along where kind of Nigeria and Ghana and all that is right now, like the Gold Coast. You would have had Nubia and some other places, which are a mix of black and Caucasian, north of that. You would have had Egypt and then North Africa, which is mostly white, essentially, white Arab, Caucasian Arab. And you would have had Ethiopia, which is black, like kind of a weird outlier, like Christian Ethiopia. There's a reason babbling about all this. But I mean, so like, when people say, like, well, in sub-Saharan Africa, no one developed the wheel, that's because there were only people in sub-Saharan Africa for a relatively recent period of modern history. And those were those people that came from the north and conquered it. Prior to that, you had like Khoisan hunter-gatherers walking around with poison arrows and so on. So anyway, Egypt, was it black? No, not really. If you actually look at the pharaohs, I mean, most of them look like a family that runs the best Italian restaurant in Louisville. I mean, like, they're a very distinctive bunch of dark-skinned white people. Like, the Egyptians clearly are not black. Now, Egypt was a multiracial society. So, like, there were many high-ranking Nubian warriors in the military. I mean, so those would be black people in our terms that came from the south of Egypt. North of the south, I guess I'm using their term, but south of the Aswan High Dam, I mean, the population shifts to black. So they're a bunch of black Egyptians, and financially and so on, they do about as well as other Egyptians. But like the Egyptian ruling dynasty is mostly Mediterranean. In fact, one of Alexander the Great's generals, I think Ptolemy, conquered Egypt. So like later in Egypt, the Ptolemaic rulers of Egypt are all pretty much white people. So no, Egypt wasn't a black society. There were a bunch of black societies though. So I mean, anyone interested in that should look up like Ghana, Songhai, Mali, Kush, Nubia, Merowe, so on down the line.
Yeah, it's all really interesting, and it's for me, seeing this stuff online. For one, like a lot of people who are commenting on this stuff, they treat Africa as if it's a country, and it's like, no, it's a huge fucking continent, and with, like you said, just all these different ethnicities and all that going on, and it's wild. A lot of people, I guess, kind of stake their pride on being, descendant of, certain of Africans, and but like with that comes this odd contradiction of being conquered, but also not wanting to admit that their descendants were also conquerors. Like it was sort of this give and take, and that's one of I think like recently I think you retweeted somebody and said like the guilt era is over. It's like people are no longer apologizing for their ancestors kicking ass, because ultimately, your people probably kick some ass, and then they got their ass kicked, and then back and forth, the way that the world goes. What do you make of that? Of sort of this. Is it a denial of history, or is it just a unwillingness to see that reality? Is it purposeful to claim some victimhood?
Yeah, I think that last line's a really good one. I think it reflects a new kind of pseudo morality. So, I mean, in the past, if anything, we used what you could call glory ethics or virtue ethics, where the idea was that if you were a good, strong man and you beat your opponents, that was good. And this is basically still where I am ethically. I mean, to the extent I think morals are real at all. Like, you shouldn't abuse someone that you win a conflict with, of course. Carry off the kids and all that stuff they did in the past, a bit over the line. But I mean, well over our line today, but that's moved historically. But I mean, the basic point though is if you are involved in a war, or involved in even a brutal game of some sport, the goal is to win. And if you do that, that's positive and praiseworthy. So that was the traditional perspective throughout history. In the minds of a lot of modern liberals, that's been replaced with what Nietzsche called slave morality, and I call prey morality, which is the idea that the highest virtue is kind of empathically not hurting people, even to the point of disadvantaging yourself. So the more victimized you were throughout history, the less others can make demands of you or criticize you or something like that. This is honestly a difficult philosophy for me to understand. It seems like how sheep would think. But like that's led to a situation today where many people don't want to claim ancestral victories. And like people like the British who conquered much of the world, or the Bantu for that matter, are kind of reduced to describing themselves as either terribly guilty about what they've done or just denying that they've done it at all. So, yeah, I mean, in the USA, you generally have people who are from a Black or Native background identifying as victimized and using that to gain benefits in the American structure, which advantages that to some extent. The reality that these same people were also victimizers, I mean, that the Black Africans or the Comanches or something conquered huge areas of land, were legendary fighters. I mean, that's more often minimized because there's no advantage to gain from it. There's no benefit to be taken from saying, well, yeah, my ancestors killed a bunch of people and then narrowly lost to your ancestors. Because that would lead to the question, well, then nobody owes anybody anything, right? Why don't we all just go to the University of Texas and see who gets a better job? And that, I mean, just from a human amoral perspective, that doesn't make a lot of sense. No one's going to argue that that's what they deserve. So you get this weird phenomenon of people using moral claims that they don't deserve to make for unethical reasons. And yeah, that's a lot of the American race debate, which is weird.
Yeah, I haven't checked in on him in a while because he blocked me. But there's an account, I think Lakota Man,
Oh yeah, he
who,
blocked me too.
yeah. So we're blocked brothers to the Lakota Man, and I mean, just a quick search. Well, just to give a little bit about Lakota Man, it's very much against white supremacy and wanting to, I guess, disrupt the social order. He's probably like for decolonization and all that stuff. But then you do a little snooping online, a little Google search, and you find out, wow, the Lakota did some really fucked up shit. They conquered quite a few people. And I just sort of, I imagine there's a sketch somewhere where it's sort of like there's a meeting of people calling for reparations. And then, it just keeps going back further and further and further until there's, one descendant of like a single celled organism who, has to, they get all of the casino cash, I guess.
It's actually a comic that's almost exactly like that from Stone Toss, or one of those kind of edgy alt comedians, but it's like reparations session, and it's like a union guy, a black union guy saying like, I demand my money as a black man. And then like behind him with the union guy's bayonet stuck in it, there's a Confederate guy like, I demand my money as a poor white man. And like behind the Confederate guy with like a hatchet stuck in his head, there's an Indian's like, I demand my money as a Native American. By the Indian, there's another Indian with like a slightly worse headdress, like, I demand my money as an original Chippewa resident of the, and it just goes on and on and on until you get back to like Neanderthal man. And I think that really is the problem. Like, yeah, the Lakota conquered all the land that the Sioux, which is how most people refer to like the Lakota Dakota peoples today, the Sioux Indians, all the land that the Lakota and the other Sioux tribes conquered, or that live on today, was conquered by them in the relatively recent past from the Anishinaabe and other great native nations. So, I mean, like the Black Hills, which the Sioux view as sacred, and like the government can't mine for minerals in them because they're Sioux medicine men with lodges in them and so on. Those were taken from other people like a few hundred years ago. So actually looking at history, one, makes you pretty cynical about human beings in general, I would say. But also, two, has the effect of taking a lot of these claims that are at first maybe a little moving. Like, oh yeah, we did beat these great native warriors. We did steal their land. I mean, there is some emotional impact of that, unless you're a complete asshole. But looking at history takes that and moves it into a much more realistic perspective. Like, okay, if we did give the Lakota their land back, wouldn't 18 other Indian tribes then be able to immediately take it from them? Like, at some point, you just have to settle down and say, look, the war is over. We won. Everyone has to go to school. And I have no problem with that whatsoever.
Yeah. And since I would say since like, October 7th of 2023, the Hamas invasion of Israel and the slaughter at the Nova Music Festival and everything that's transpired after that, I've seen a lot more people be more comfortable calling for one, the eradication of Israel, but also just decolonization in general everywhere, to the point where I think it was a woman named Bree Newsome who wrote something like, what did you think decolonization meant? Like vibes, and, for a lot of the people, saying that, it's like, I wonder, what do they actually mean? Because if it's bloodshed that they're asking for, I mean, most of the people I see calling for this are not capable of bloodshed. Like a lot of them would be, they'd be eradicated, pretty swiftly. I don't know if a lot of these people have ever even had a fight. Although Bree Newsome, she did come out a long time ago talking, defending, I think, knife fighting among teenagers, which was one of the most amazing things that I'd ever seen. But yeah, have you noticed that the decolonizers and et cetera?
Yeah, I mean, so first of all, I do think a lot of these are effete little upper middle class kids. Bree Newsome's comment on knife fighting was pretty hilarious. Like, yeah, kids have been having fights, okay, including fights with knives for a very long time. The police don't need to get involved. I mean, it was the ultimate like hall monitoring lib comment. And I mean, obviously you can't have public dueling going on and so on. So, and I mean, like, there is a real question, like, if you abolish the police, what would happen? What would happen is that the people calling for police abolition would immediately be killed or made into sex slaves or something like that. in an anarchic society, none of those people would survive. And all of those like arguments, like we would do perfectly well if, crazy liberal policy A were adopted, are just really easy to debunk. It's like the guy online, one of the classic fourth wave feminists typed out "kill all men," and some guy commented underneath, "even George Floyd." And her response is like, "Oh God, no! You're sick. What the fuck is wrong with you?" It's like 4 tweets in a row. But I mean, so in practice, like actions have consequences, so on. That Bree Newsome would not like the world she would create. But I don't actually even know where I was going here. Like, yeah, a lot of these people advocate extreme solutions would not survive in the world of the extreme solutions. Oh, but decolonization would actually just mean genocide, like in the real sense.
Right.
So colonization simply means in my field external governance. It's a group of people taking their system and moving that into land or into society that's occupied by another group of people. So, for example, white English people went to South Africa and actually got tired of the fractious fighting and pretty much conquered the Zulu and the Boers, honestly. So that's a colonial system. These 2 great warrior groups now are going to have to pick some representatives or whatever, and you're under the British system. So when you decolonize, what do? Well, you get rid of the external people and their external government. And that might make sense in a few local examples, like in Madagascar, for example, during the end of the British Empire. It basically meant, you set government house on fire or something. I mean, most of the people there are Malagasy. But in the United States, what decolonization would mean is killing everyone who's white, black, or Asian. If you're taking it seriously, I mean, like the North and South American native indigenous peoples would take back the land. Now, obviously, like amorally speaking, no one's going to let that happen. No one's going to let you kill their wife because you might have a slightly better argument about who should have won a war 200 years ago. That's what it means. And I mean, that's what it means in the Israeli context, by the way. Like, Hamas is objectively speaking one of the least sympathetic causes I've ever seen. I mean, it's a terrorist state. I mean, it's a terrorist government of a small ghetto ethno state run by rapists. And I mean, I can see it in terms of the ghetto part, so that's not all Palestine's fault. But I mean, just the idea that this is a group of honorable people who are somehow being oppressed in this war. I mean, we now know when they revised the UN death totals downward, the total casualty count across the conflict over much of a year now is only about 20,000. That includes roughly 1,000 Israelis. There's just nothing evil that's being done. There's no possible reason to cheer for Hamas. But what Hamas wants when they talk about decolonization is the classic. They want all the Jews gone from the land they consider theirs. I mean, they might keep a few around to run some businesses and so on, but like they specifically don't want a 2-state solution. They say things like, from the river to the sea, we want it all. So that's what being decolonized means. Like everyone is killed or packed on a boat, sent back to Poland.
With early on, I tweeted out, basically like, can all the, pro-Palestine people tell all the pro-Hamas people to stop speaking, because it's really, it's really fucking up, your argument. And then, I mean, what I've seen over the past, couple of months is that people are openly saying, "Oh, we're pro-Hamas." Like, and again, that's not saying everybody, but the idea that how comfortable people are, saying like, "Yeah, we're totally, for what these guys are doing. They're freedom fighters, et cetera," I think is a little, problematic, I guess would be one of the words that I would use for that.
I'm not surprised by the pro-Hamas movement at all. So, I mean, first of all, like, I don't think that there's a sharp distinction between Hamas and Palestine at all. I mean, Hamas is the elected government of Palestine. Hamas is polling at 76% in Palestine. So when people say these glib things like, "Well, I don't support Hamas," let me tell you, I just support the duly elected people's representatives of the state of Palestine. It's like, bro, I mean, I went to law school, playing these word games like that is Hamas. That's who that is. Like, that's who Palestine voted in. If there was another election in either Gaza or the West Bank right now, Hamas would win in both, followed by Fatah in the West Bank, which is just about as bad.
What I find is that a lot of people who point out that the last election in Gaza was, like 20 years ago, and that a lot of the kids that are there now, they didn't have a chance to, to vote or choose their leaders. I haven't seen anybody actually call for elections in Gaza over that time period. And I think if people were arguing in good faith, there would be a paper trail of them saying, 4 years after the first election, you've got to have elections in Gaza. 4 years later, you got to have elections, got to have elections, got to have elections. Where I think a lot of people use it as just a talking point to, paint them as, innocent people rather than people who are actually taking part in their leadership,
Yeah, I mean, I think that the whole Hamas squad thing is just complete bullshit. Like almost all the arguments that are made for Hamas, which is again the newly elected government of Palestine, are nonsensical. I mean, like the argument that Palestinians are not to some extent complicit in the things Hamas does because they didn't get a chance to vote for Hamas. None of the American left. I mean, I don't know every individual person, but I can't recall any prominent American leftists in major venues calling for Gazan elections and kind of stepping on internal Gazan sovereignty there to do so. I don't remember that ever happening. And also we all know what would happen in those elections. Hamas would win. I mean, Hamas is polled consistently over 50% for the past 15 years. Like ratings for Hamas actually improved after the October 7th massacre. So, I mean, that's just what would happen. If Hamas wasn't elected, some other Islamo-fascist party would be elected. I mean, you still have Fatah. I mean, you have these slightly different PLO, as I understand. I mean, so it's not as though there's a strong like women's liber contingent in Gaza that's just ready to go. I mean, it's just one of those players. And again, like the idea that there's now obviously you try to minimize collateral damage in a war, but the idea that there's like a hyper innocent Palestinian moderate population that's really separate from the pro-Hamas Islamist majority of the Palestinian population just isn't real. I mean, like one of the crazy things about October 7th was that in many cases, obviously raped, sort of bleeding hostages, people with broken arms were brought back into Gaza, just as battle captives used to be, back in the day during the Indian raids, in the back of pickup trucks crying. And there were crowds in the streets, like lining the roads, like spitting on them, chanting, waving flags, ululating, or however you say that. So, I mean, then the numbers for the ruling party that orchestrated a successful military strike went up. So I don't really think that, again, this is one of the least sympathetic causes in the history of the world. I don't think that there's been a lot of campaigning for elections in that region of the world, and I don't think there's any doubt what the elections would result in.
Yeah. It's been I might sound, completely naive here. But out of all the stuff that's happened, one of the things that I was most surprised to learn is that Hamas didn't build bomb shelters for people in Gaza. That no. with all the tunnel work, because I've heard about the tunnel work. There's footage of them of reporters going in tunnels and showing how intricate they are. I'm still amazed that no bomb shelters were built, and and I understand why. I mean, because they don't give a shit if their civilian populace, die. But yeah, call me naive, but I thought I thought they would have that already, some part of their structures. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I mean, so this is, again, like we in America keep trying to put our idea of victimization, which comes from basically like Jim Crow in the worst state, let's say Alabama, between two groups that really had no reason to be racially or militarily opposed, like actual oppression. We keep trying to put that framework into other situations. Like, so Israel and Gaza have been obviously imperfect to one another is a very mild way of putting this. But describing the problems in Gaza as a result of Israeli oppression doesn't really make a ton of sense. Like, because it's such a potentially sympathetic cause, like the Gaza region of Palestine has gotten, I think, $18 billion in foreign aid over the past decade and a half, since, say, 2000, maybe. That's being very, very lenient there with the parameters. I mean, Gaza is the size of Philadelphia. I mean, that's an incredible civic budget there. What happened with that money is that Hamas basically stole it. I mean, there are famous videos, like you can Google, like Hamas takes water pipes, makes rocket launchers. They got these excellent all steel, I don't know if PVC would be the term, that's normally plastic pipe, but all steel water pipes, probably presumably corrosion free in that desert environment. I don't know why they used that type of pipe, but there are videos of them taking them, cutting them, soldering them, and making the barrels for really high performance rocket launchers. I mean, like, that sort of thing happened all the time. You know, in terms of the Hamas tunnels under Gaza, there were 311 miles of tunnels under the Gaza Strip. I mean, like, when we fought the Japanese in Iwo Jima, which is considered to be like the best mutual example of what's called sapping, like digging underground and trying to catch the other guy. I think there were 10 miles of tunnels, like on the whole island from all sides. So like people have been sort of mole-like building this whole other world under the Gaza Strip that you could put tens of thousands of people in. Yeah, they had no interest in putting people who weren't fighting men down there. Maybe a few concubines or something, but yeah, of course there are no bomb shelters for civilians, something like that. And it's not even just because the Hamas fighters are ruthless warriors or something like that. Like, we're less prone to that in our society, but we can understand it. It's because the Hamas fighters want there to be as many dead Palestinians as possible. And that's not me criticizing a military opponent. It's just sort of an amoral consulting analysis. Like, the bread and butter of Hamas is being able to bring in the Western media, critique Israel, and get negotiating gains. And the thing that does that for them is like dead Palestinian kids that don't have faces anymore. So they want as many dead Palestinian kids that don't have faces anymore as possible. It's difficult for some Westerners to understand that, but it's just really quite logical. It's along the same lines as, why did Vladimir Putin invade Ukraine? Well, because he wanted land, and Ukraine had a lot of it, and he doesn't like Ukrainians. So the basic analysis was, fuck them, we'll take some of their provinces. And I mean, that's the same thing Hamas is thinking. Like, no, Hamas is never going to spend money to build a bomb shelter when that would reduce the number of people that are killed, and so it would reduce the power of Hamas.
Yeah, I think I was on Live from America podcast with my friends Noam Dworman and Hatem Gabber, and I forget the journalist who was also a guest on. One of the things that we were talking about, it involves like the inability for Americans to understand the mindset of both the Hamas fighters, Palestinians, and Israel. Like the people who were marching in the streets of New York, talking about from the river to the sea. It's like, no, Israel's not going anywhere, and you really need to understand that. And saying from the river to the sea, which I think like Norman Finkelstein actually talked about when he was on campus at Columbia, is like, don't use the term for the river to the sea, because it's off-putting. It's just it's not going to happen, because the Israelis are fighting, for their existence. And me as an American, I don't understand what that's like, because I live a pretty pampered, comfortable life here in New Jersey.
I mean, I think that people waste a lot of time on kind of moral analysis. Not that we are, but I mean, just sort of like, they both have a solid ethical case, but are the Jews or the Arabs really in the right? And I mean, like a good question would be kind of, who gives a shit? Like, it's much more useful most of the time, when most people are acting reasonably honorably, to look at the incentive structures that are in place. So like, why is Israel fighting so hard for their land? Well, because the Holocaust was 80 years ago. I mean, the Jews understand that in the absence of an independent, armed Jewish state, the Jews could be attacked again and annihilated at will. Like, the difference between groups like blacks or Slavs that face some abuse historically, Irish people, and Jews, is that there are only about 22 million Jews in the entire world. You could kill all of the Jews if you wanted to. I mean, obviously, no one watching this does, but there have been people historically that did, and Hitler was not the first of them. So, I mean, the nuclear powered Jewish country is the counterpoint to that. And obviously, if you're Jewish, you're going to value that, much less Israeli. You're going to value that far more than you're going to value the discomfort of some people from an enemy group historically that had to move 20 miles to the west. It's not going to be a particularly close contest. So yes, of course, not one single living Israeli is going to volunteer to give up their country. Or should they? I mean, like, wars happen historically, and there are almost no situations in history, except for Israel, Palestine, and maybe elements of the American reparations debate, where the side that honorably loses a war is kind of told to never get over that and stick around, just be as bitter as possible about it. And maybe someday strong allies will help you recover. Generally, I mean, historically, if you lost a war, you were defeated, and you literally, if you look at the size of this area, moved 20 miles to the west. What people have encouraged you to do is begin building there. Perhaps you'll get revenge at some point in the future, but your goal should be to develop your life, not to focus what you're doing now on this long-held tribal hostility toward the people that once beat you in a conflict. So it's obvious why Israelis want Israel to exist. It's obvious why Palestinians don't like Israel too, by the way. I'm not blind to that. But the Palestinian cause, the idea that the founding of the Jewish state following a war when most of the Arabs fought with the Germans is itself this evil thing, the Nakba that needs to be reversed. That's a very unsympathetic cause. And it's also something that's never going to happen, knock on wood. But something else needs to be taught to the Palestinian kids. Something else needs to be done for the Palestinian people. The old idea was kind of the Singapore by the sea two-state model. The big barrier to that is actually Hamas as well. Like, Hamas doesn't want two states. None of the Palestinians want two states. They all want the Jews dead. So the question is, the real barrier to a fair negotiation on the table is the fact that the majority of people on the Arab side want all the Jews dead. How do you get around that? That's the question.
That's the question. And perhaps you, viewer, have the answer to that. But I've had Will for a very long time on here through technical difficulty. And all that. I appreciate it. Will, you have a book coming out, don't you? Or it's out already?
My new book is called Lies, Your Liberal Teacher Told You. Books always, even like dry historical books, always have these aggressive titles when they come out with the larger presses. But I like that one. And it's coming out July the 11th. I encourage people definitely to go out and buy it. And I think it's actually a pretty good book. It breaks down some of the things we've talked about today, but the distinction between, eternal and temporal morality, but also just some of the lies that are told in everyday conversation. Were Native Americans actually peaceful? Was American slavery unique? Were there a lot of communists around during the 1950s? Read me and find out.